The city of Luxor with its vast temples and ruins is known to hold many secrets of ancient Egypt. But there is one secret that still remains hidden, buried in the sands of time. It is the story of the Temple of Anubis, a site long abandoned, but said to be cursed. It's a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur, and anyone who enters may never return. The story begins in the early 1900s, when a team of archaeologists led by Dr. Richard Harris was tasked with uncovering the secrets of Egypt's forgotten past. They were assigned to investigate a little-known site near the Valley of the Kings, an area where many tombs of the pharaohs were scattered. Their goal was to uncover a temple that had been rumored to exist in the area for centuries, though no official records had ever confirmed its location. When the team arrived in Luxor, the desert heat was unbearable, and the sun burned down on them with an intensity that seemed to warn them to turn back. But Dr. Harris was determined to uncover the hidden truths of ancient Egypt, so they pressed on. The area they were searching in had been ignored by most archaeologists as it was considered too remote and dangerous. But Dr. Harris had a hunch, a feeling that something significant was waiting to be discovered. After several weeks of digging, the team's efforts were finally rewarded. One day, as they dug deep into the sands, they uncovered what appeared to be a stone doorway, partially buried beneath layers of earth. It was unlike any other entrance the team had encountered before. The door was massive, intricately carved with symbols and markings that seemed to shift when the light hit them, as though they were alive. The carvings depicted Anubis, the god of the afterlife, standing tall over the bodies of the dead, guiding them through the underworld. But it was the eyes of Anubis that held the most unsettling aspect of the temple. The eyes of the god seemed to follow the archaeologists as they worked, watching their every move with a gaze that seemed too lifelike for a mere carving. The team was unnerved but continued their work, convinced that they were about to make a monumental discovery. When they finally managed to open the door, a cold wind rushed out from the darkness beyond, sending a shiver down their spines. It was as though the temple had been sealed for millennia, waiting for someone to dare disturb its slumber. The archaeologists, with their torches raised high, stepped into the temple and immediately felt a heavy, unnatural silence surround them. The air was thick, as though it had been trapped for ages, and the scent of incense and decay lingered in the air. The first chamber they entered was vast, filled with towering statues of Anubis and other gods of the Egyptian pantheon. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs, some faded, others so well preserved that they seemed to glow in the dim light of their torches. The symbols on the walls depicted scenes of ritual sacrifice, offerings to the gods, and the souls of the dead making their way through the afterlife. But what was most unsettling was the fact that there were no signs of human presence, no mummies, no remains, just an emptiness that seemed to breathe with life. As they explored further, the group came upon a large, open chamber. In the center of the room stood a massive stone sarcophagus, surrounded by piles of ancient relics, some of which were unlike anything they had seen before. There were ceremonial daggers, vessels filled with unidentifiable substances, and ancient scrolls that seemed to shimmer with an energy of their own. But it was the figure sitting before the sarcophagus that truly froze them in place. A mummified priestess, perfectly preserved, sat cross-legged in front of the stone coffin. She wore an elaborate headdress, her face painted in dark, ancient hues, her eyes wide open, staring into the abyss. Her hands were outstretched, holding a ceremonial dagger as if waiting to carry out some ancient rite, but her eyes, they were the most terrifying part. They seemed to gleam with a life of their own, and as Dr. Harris approached her, it felt as though the very air around them became charged with a malevolent energy. As he extended a hand to touch the priestess's cold fingers, an odd sensation washed over him, a sense of overwhelming dread that gripped his heart. The walls of the temple began to shake, a low, rumbling sound emanating from deep within the stone. It was as if the temple itself was alive, reacting to his touch. Suddenly, the priestess's hand moved. Slowly at first, and then with increasing speed, she raised her dagger toward him, The archaeologists gasped in horror, but when Dr. Harris looked again, the hand was still, and the dagger rested against her lap. Panic set in. The group quickly retreated, but the temple seemed to shift around them, its layout twisting as if it had a mind of its own. The walls closed in, the corridors grew narrower, and the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. They tried to find their way back to the entrance, but no matter which direction they took, they found themselves lost within the temple's maze-like interior. The only sound that filled the air was the soft whispering of voices, voices that seemed to come from the very walls. As the hours dragged on, the team began to realize something horrifying. One by one they began to vanish. First Claire, the young archaeologist who had been taking notes in the back of the group, was gone without a trace. She had simply disappeared into the shadows. Then, David, the lead excavator, was found collapsed on the floor, his eyes wide open in terror, but his body cold and lifeless. No visible wounds, no sign of struggle, just the empty expression of someone who had seen something beyond human comprehension. As night fell and the temperature dropped, Dr. Harris felt himself growing weaker. The whispers grew louder and he could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind him even though no one was there. He stumbled through the corridors disoriented, feeling as though the walls were closing in around him, and then, at the very heart of the temple, he found himself face to face with the priestess once more. This time her eyes were not just open, they were alive. Her gaze was piercing, locking onto him with an intensity that seemed to reach into his very soul. The dagger in her hand shimmered with an eerie glow, her lips parted and she whispered a single word, "Leave." Harris didn't need any further warning. He turned and fled, running blindly through the twisting halls, desperately searching for an exit. But the temple seemed to have no intention of letting him leave. The walls pulsated, as though the stone itself was alive, and the air thickened as though it were trying to choke him. In the final moments, Dr. Harris stumbled upon a door, a small, hidden passage that led out into the desert. As he reached the entrance, he turned to look back one last time at the temple. The priestess's eyes followed him, and as he ran into the desert night, he could swear he heard her voice, soft but clear. "The dead do not leave." The next day, a rescue team arrived at the temple, but they found nothing. No traces of the archaeologists, no sign of struggle. The only thing that remained was the stone doorway, sealed once more, as if the temple had swallowed its secrets and its victims. To this day, the Temple of Anubis remains hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. It is said that anyone who seeks it out will meet the same fate as Dr. Harris and his team. And as the sun sets over the desert, the whispering voices of the lost can still be heard, calling out from the shadows, waiting for the next unwitting soul to enter the cursed halls.